Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathan. I love movies and I want to share that with you. From old originals to cult classics and foreign favorites, along with straight up drivel, WWW is your place for all things movies. Stick around and we'll leave you with a movie to watch over the weekend with your family or that special someone. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Wednesdays, the show where we talk about 3 movies all in the same night. For tonight's episode, the 3 movies that we're going to be talking about are an interesting breed. Normally here on What to Watch Wednesdays, I like to talk about 3 movies that are in an established trilogy, or 3 movies that are not in a very established trilogy. Sometimes I'll talk about 3 movies by the same director, but that doesn't mean that they're connected officially in a trilogy. Or I'll talk about 3 movies that are in a trilogy. And sometimes it's not just the director. Sometimes it's a motif, like Lego movies or something like that. Or in comparison, it's got the Matrix series, or the Matrix trilogy as it's called, or things like that. You get my point. I either talk about established ones or unestablished ones. Tonight, we're talking about a mix of both. Because tonight we are taking a look at a well-known quote-unquote trilogy in the form of the Cornetto trilogy, otherwise known as the 3 Flavors Cornetto trilogy or just the Cornetto trilogy. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, we're talking about 3 movies that were directed and co-written by the wonderful writer and director Edgar Wright, and co-written with Simon Pegg, the wonderful actor and writer, and always co-starring the wonderful actor Nick Frost. These are absolutely hilarious English comedies, and all of them are great. So, without further ado, the 3 movies that we're talking about tonight are going to be Shaun of the Dead from 2004, Hot Fuzz from 2007, and The World's End from 2013. This isn't one that I've had a burning desire to talk about, or maybe I have. I can't tell anymore. What I do know is that I'm very, very excited to talk about them tonight. Specifically Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz and The World's End, so I've just said specifically all 3 of them. But we gotta start somewhere, and we'll start with Shaun of the Dead after the break. So stick around. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our first movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Shaun of the Dead from 2004, available to rent from places such as Amazon, YouTube, and Fandango at Home. For the basic plot summary of Shaun of the Dead, we follow Shaun, unsurprisingly, as Shaun's girlfriend breaks up with him because he's lazy, uninvolved, and can't separate himself from his best friend and housemate, Ed. Off to a rip-roaring start, and things naturally progress from Shaun's girlfriend breaking up with him to a zombie invasion. That's why it's called Shaun of the Dead. It's a reference to Dawn of the Dead, the famous zombie movie. Do you get it? Okay, let's back up here. Let's back up. I'm talking about this like it's super novel, but here's the thing. Everybody's probably heard of Shaun of the Dead. A lot of people have heard of Shaun of the Dead. Maybe not everybody, but quite a few people have heard of Shaun of the Dead. It's a pretty well-known movie at this stage in time, right? And naturally, that would mean I've seen it before, and you may have seen it before. I can assure you I've seen it before. I think I've watched it about 3 different times, and I've liked it each time. So why am I saying it like it's a novel thing? Like, why is this suddenly a new thing to me? Why am I trying to present it like it's new? Well, dear listeners, let me tell you something about Shaun of the Dead that you probably haven't heard before. Here's one thing you need to understand. I am a subconscious fan of Edgar Wright. I like his style. I like the way he sets up movies. I like the way he does a lot of things. But I was never able to admit it up until literally this week. That's really funny when I say it out loud, but also kind of disappointing when I think about the implications of that, in that I was basically forcing myself not to have fun watching a movie like Shaun of the Dead. Consider that for a second. I was forcing myself to not have fun watching Shaun of the Dead. I can admit now, after rewatching Shaun of the Dead for probably the third time, that honestly, I think it was just a problem with a younger version of me, or it was just a problem I had in general, or maybe it's a problem with the movie. Here's what I'm going to lay out. Shaun of the Dead is really good on a third watch. I can attest to that because I can look at a lot of the setup, at a lot of the stakes, at a lot of the things happening and go, I've seen this before. I know where it goes. Let's see how they tie in together. Now that makes sense for a lot of types of movies. Mystery movies in particular tend to be good at that kind of thing. Sure, you already know how the mystery ends at the end, but and it's like Knives Out. Sure, you know what happens at the end of Knives Out, but you still enjoy watching all those elements be pieced together over the course of the movie. It's an interesting comparison to make when talking about a zombie movie. Not that zombie movies don't have mystery, but it's an interesting, I suppose, so philosophy is what you could call it, an interesting philosophy outlook to apply to Shaun of the Dead specifically, because the mystery of how did the zombie invasion start is never solved. The mystery is why is Shaun so stubborn and uninvolved in his own relationship? Will he ever conquer his uninvolvementness? That's not a real word, but I just made it up. Will Shaun ever conquer his mundane, random existential crisis in the middle of a zombie apocalypse? That's the mystery of Shaun of the Dead. And you kind of have to watch it a couple times before that sinks in, or at least I had to. I liked this movie when I first watched it, but I didn't see the hype around it. I'm going to be honest with you. I feel like I'm going all over the place, but I have to narrow it down somewhere. Listen to me right here and now. When I first watched the movie Shaun of the Dead, it didn't click for me. Not in the way that it has after watching it a second time and watching it a third time recently. On that third watch through, I sat there going, I think I get it now. I understand why there's so much hype around it. I understand all of the buzz. I understand why people like it. And I like it now because I understand that. One of the biggest reasons I think it works is honestly because of this running gag where Shaun doesn't notice that there's a zombie apocalypse for like the first 30 minutes of the movie. I already knew that was a thing. But watching it again, I forgot how funny it was. It didn't sink in for me how funny it actually was until my third watch through. That's funny in and of itself. It also took, for some reason, a while for me to really understand how good Simon Pegg and Nick Frost are in their roles. Simon Pegg playing Shaun and Nick Frost playing his flatmate Ed, or his housemate, but it's probably a flatmate. These are English-British comedies, right? So his flatmate Ed. It took me a while to realize how good of a duo they are. And when I watched it for a third time, I'm sitting there going, I need to be able to tell if these two are best friends in real life through their performance. Let me confirm to you right now that absolutely happens. I was more than satisfied with the answer that I got. They are definitely best friends in real life. There is no way that some actors could pull off that level of chemistry if they weren't already really good friends. I will also admit that there are some really good running jokes. Things like, you've got red on you, or saying 2 seconds. Without context, that sounds like the most random assortment of maybe 5 words. I can't count. How many words is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for you've got red on you, and then 2 for 2 seconds. I really can't count. That's the funny part. Here's the point. Those jokes, I didn't appreciate how much they evolved over the course of the movie until watching it again for a third time. I didn't appreciate how well the joke about Simon Pegg, Shaun of the Dead himself, walking to the convenience store, both before and after the zombie outbreak happens, until my third watch through. And I'm at a loss for whether or not that is because of the movie itself or because I am not the smartest person on the planet. Weirdly enough, I'm leaning towards it being on the half of the movie. But at the same time, I can't in good conscience say that confidently, knowing the fact that Hot Fuzz, the next movie we talk about, clicked for me almost instantaneously when I first saw it, and watching it again only reinforced it. So I'll admit it, I think it was me. I definitely think it was me. And I definitely think it was me because I know how I feel about Hot Fuzz. And you're going to figure out what I feel about Hot Fuzz after the break. So stick around for that. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our second movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Hot Fuzz from 2007, available to rent from places such as Amazon, YouTube, and Fandango at Home. For the basic plot summary of Hot Fuzz, we follow the police officer Nicholas Angel, who is promoted to the role of sergeant and is transferred immediately to a small, quaint town known as Sanford, after being stationed in the bustling city of London. So it's a bit of a shock to him. But what's more of a shock to him, you may be asking? Well, what's more of a shock is the fact that this quaint, charming, quiet little town known as Sanford has a bunch of murders going on, and most of the people seem to be calling them accidents. Oopsie daisies, that's probably not good. I should clarify really quickly that Nicholas Angel is again played by the wonderful Simon Pegg, although he doesn't have any facial hair, and that messes with my brain. At the same time, he also enlists the help of a fellow officer, that being Danny, who is again played by Nick Frost, because we all love Nick Frost. Me being the proprietor of What to Watch Wednesdays, I will make a statement on behalf of What to Watch Wednesdays. What to Watch Wednesdays fully endorses, supports, and loves dearly the man Nick Frost. Anyways, with that clarification out of the way, let me state something very factual about Hot Fuzz. And by factual, I mean completely subjective, but factual in the sense that what I'm about to say is factually subjective. That doesn't make any sense. Here's what does make sense. Hot Fuzz is my favorite Edgar Wright movie that I have seen so far. And I am at least partially convinced that that won't change, even if I end up watching all of his movies. I personally adore everything about Hot Fuzz. It is my favorite Edgar Wright movie for a reason, and we'll get into those reasons. But just to give you an idea, I said in the last review that I'm a subconscious fan of Edgar Wright. When I say that, I mean I'm a fan of him. It just took me a while to realize it. After I realized it, I became even more of a fan than I already was. I'm a hardcore fan of Edgar Wright at this point in my life, and Hot Fuzz is the perfect example of that, because I would officially put Hot Fuzz as my number 11 favorite movie of all time. My 11th favorite movie of all time. That is a weird spot on the list of favorite movies of all time. Wouldn't you agree? Yes, you would. Thank you for agreeing with me that I'm a bit crazy for picking out my 11th favorite movie. But might as well be Hot Fuzz. Let's be honest here. Hot Fuzz is honestly awesome. I can't think of a single thing wrong with Hot Fuzz. There's nitpicks, there's issues here and there, but it is the perfect exemplification of one principle that I didn't talk about fully with Shaun of the Dead. Because Hot Fuzz, in my opinion, does it better. Hot Fuzz is really good at showing Edgar Wright's ability to execute the ideas of setup and payoff. I mean that in the sense of, here is a loose thread, here's a dumb joke where, let's say, something early on where Nicholas Angel gets called a fascist by a lady who runs a hotel. Don't worry about the context, just follow me here. Here's something I could say without spoiling any of this movie. When she calls him a fascist at the beginning of the movie, you better darn well believe that she will call him a fascist again before the movie ends. That's simple, and it's very effective for comedy. Because out of context, it's so funny to just hear, oh, Nicholas Angel got called a fascist. Let me tell you, in context, it's actually quite funnier. It's a lot funnier, even with the context, which is a heavy compliment. But keep in mind, then we got the payoff of, oh, she'll say it again, maybe in a different context this time around. Ooh, let's see how that works out. And that is one of 50 possible examples I could give to you of Hot Fuzz doing that exact thing. I'm not exaggerating when I say about 50. There is about 50. Again, I think I've established that I can't count on this show. So I'm not even going to try. I'm going to round up to the most probable number, and I'm going to guess and say it's about 50. And that doesn't feel like an overt exaggeration. That's how crazy we're talking. Just that one simple example of Nicholas Angel being called a fascist is 1 out of 50. And keep in mind that this doesn't just include jokes where someone gets called a name or something gets thrown out there. This applies to the plot. This applies to a lot of aspects of the plot of the movie, as a matter of fact, because this does have murders in it, but it's a murder mystery. Nobody knows who's doing it initially. It's a mystery movie in a way, which is what I was talking about, partially with Shaun of the Dead, weirdly enough. It's a mystery movie where the director is perfect at setup and payoff, where a simple joke about a hotel lady calling a police officer a fascist is downright hilarious enough for me to give it an individual shout out. Do you understand why I love this movie so much? Every single plot point is set up and paid off at some point. Nearly every single one. Not nearly. Pretty much. I can't even think of a single one that wasn't paid off. It is so incredibly satisfying to watch a movie where they basically throw every single thread at you and go, okay, let's tie them all up. Yes, please do. It's extremely cathartic to watch a very well-written movie like this. This is incredibly well-written. Now that I've gone on and on about how well it establishes everything, you'll probably understand when I make up my next point, bring up my next point about Hot Fuzz. And that is, it is one of the few movies that I think I would legitimately feel bad spoiling. Let me repeat that, because it may not seem super significant, but understand, I already feel bad about spoiling movies for myself. I feel bad about spoiling movies for other people. I don't like spoilers, but I really don't want to spoil the plot for Hot Fuzz on this show tonight. And I'm going to reluctantly spoil it on What to Watch Weekends, reluctantly, because the plot is so tightly knit, it's difficult to want to spoil any of it. That is a heavy compliment from someone who already doesn't like spoilers. I have been frustrated with myself for being spoiled on so many movies before, and when I watched this movie with no idea on how it was going to end, it was the most cathartic, satisfying, beautiful thing I have ever seen. And that is keeping in mind that all of these plot points, all of this setup and payoff, everything that I've just said was my opinion when I first watched the movie. I've seen it twice. When I first watched the movie, I was kind of in a state of possibly putting it on maybe the number 12 spot on my favorite movies list. And I've seen it twice, and now it's moved up to 11th. If I watch it again and again, maybe it'll become my new favorite movie. I don't know. What I do know is I can't recommend Hot Fuzz enough to the general populace. Heavily recommend Hot Fuzz. Which brings me to a good point, which is that I may not heavily recommend the next movie on our watch list, but keep in mind, it has to go up against Hot Fuzz. So with that in mind, after the break, we'll jump into The World's End. Stick around. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our third and final movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at The World's End from 2013, available to rent now from places such as Amazon, YouTube, and Fandango at Home. For the basic plot summary of The World's End, we follow Gary King, who is played by Simon Pegg yet again. Gary King is a man in his 40s who never got over his high school years. How fun! And you know how he copes with this by deciding to invite his now 40-year-old friends from back in high school to a pub crawl. That's right. What's a pub crawl, you may be asking? It's a bar crawl, where you go from bar to bar and drink a lot of alcohol. That is a factual statement. That is what they do in this movie. They go from bar to bar and drink a lot of alcohol. These 40-year-old men who did the exact same thing when they were in high school are now doing it as 40-year-old men. Because again, Gary King cannot let go of the past. Anyways, they have to go to 12 different pubs and reach the final one, that being the world's end, which is why the movie is called The World's End. It's also called that because at some point in the movie, the blanks show up. And you may be asking, what are the blanks? And my response to that is, shush. Shush, 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 shush. I wanted to see how long I could do that for. I got far enough that it was funny. And saying far enough it was funny is a really good way to describe how I feel about The World's End. No, I'm not going to go back and talk about the blanks. Don't worry about it. Here's the thing you got to keep in mind about The World's End as a movie, and in connection with the two that came before it. Here's the thing about the Cornetto trilogy as a whole. They're not exactly built to be in the same timeline or be a consecutive story between each other. The main reason that they're lumped together is they were all directed and co-written by Edgar Wright. They all co-starred and were co-written by Simon Pegg, and they were co-starring Nick Frost, and there were some recurring actors here and there. One good example would probably be Martin Freeman, who was in all three in some role or another. So with that in mind, they're not exactly built to be a continuous story, so it may feel unfair to compare them. At the same time, the styles are so very similar, and it's just the topics that have changed. And with Simon Pegg being in it, it's always going to be a party, so it's like, which performance of Simon Pegg do you prefer? Do you prefer the one that was in Shaun of the Dead, the one in Hot Fuzz, or the one in The World's End? And that is my first thing to say about The World's End. Despite the movie itself being kind of weak in comparison to the two that came before it, I think that Simon Pegg's performance as Gary King is probably his best that I've seen so far. And this is from a person who's a severe fanboy for Hot Fuzz and loves the character of Nicholas Angel. Nicholas Angel is so funny. He's a perfect police officer. He's very prim and proper and very, very, very obsessed with process. In The World's End, Simon Pegg plays the complete opposite of that kind of character. A rule breaker, an absolute chaotic force of maniacal evil. Maniacal is not a word, but I made it up. Deal with it. It means he's a maniac, because he absolutely is. Gary King is a total maniac, and I can just kind of tell by watching it that it's the role Simon Pegg has always wanted to play. He is sick of being just the straight man, the one who, or just the comedic relief. He wants to be both at the same time, and then neither, and transform into the literal joke character who is downright unhinged at all points in his life. In his existence on screen specifically, but that is his life in terms of being a character. At all moments on screen, he is unhinged and out there. And it kind of makes up for the movie feeling not as good as the other two. Keep in mind when I say not as good, I mean it coming off of the back of Hot Fuzz, which in my opinion is perfection, and Shaun of the Dead, a movie that even when I didn't exactly get it, was still really, really, really good. At least in my opinion, at least. Those are two movies that are very hard to follow up on. So giving The World's End some props for at least trying to follow up and having some redeeming qualities is better than nothing. It's certainly one of my favorite third movie in a trilogy that I've looked at, probably since Terminator 3, if I'm being honest. It's my favorite in a trilogy that I've looked at since Terminator 3. You can quote me on that. I think part of the reason that this movie sticks out to me is that I kind of like the setup a little bit more than the other two. The other two have great setups, keep in mind. The other two have really fun setups. You've got Simon Pegg in Shaun of the Dead playing Shaun, whose girlfriend breaks up with him, and then there's a zombie outbreak, right? You've got Nicholas Angel, played by Simon Pegg, in Hot Fuzz, who doesn't decide. He is promoted to sergeant and sent to middle of nowhere town and then has to deal with murders. That's also a fun setup. And then with The World's End, you have Gary King, who isn't really a victim of circumstance. He's a victim of himself, where he decides, let's go on the pub crawl, and go back to the hometown and relive the glory days from, I don't know, more than 20 years ago. I think you can understand why I find that a little more engaging than just the basic setup being stuff happening to somebody. Gary is making the stuff happen. It feels just a little more interesting from that perspective. And I think it also benefits from having multiple chances for comedy. Keep in mind, this pub crawl is 12 pubs. There are 12 of them. That is a big number to get through in a night, especially for a bunch of 40-year-olds, some of whom may not have had alcohol in a while. That's quite a lot to deal with. And from that perspective, I think it sets out to do just a lot with a little, and it achieves doing quite a lot with what could be seen as just a little. So from all I've said, it sounds kind of conflicting when I stand here and say it's the weakest out of the three. And I can't, in good confidence, go on for much longer because we do have to wrap up the show. But I have to say that no matter what it sounds like, keep in mind that The World's End is the weakest in comparison to the other two. Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead just had a lot more from the outset and did a lot more with so much more. The World's End achieves a lot with a little, but I would have preferred that maybe they had a lot and then did a lot with a lot. I've said a lot in the past few seconds, so you may have understood what I'm saying, but just to clarify, The World's End is not bad. The World's End is not even just decent or okay. The World's End is good, but it had big shoes to fill, and it just made sense that it may not have done that. So with all that being said, thank you all for listening in to What to Watch Wednesdays tonight. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Wednesdays and What to Watch Weekends, the show that will be on this Saturday from 8 to 10 p.m., where I'll be talking about these three movies again, along with maybe another Edgar Wright movie or maybe his TV show. Haven't figured that out quite yet, but we shall see, and I'd highly recommend tuning in to What to Watch Weekends to figure out what I will be talking about. Again, this Saturday from 8 to 10 p.m. I will also be back next Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. here on 88.1 The Burg for another episode of What to Watch Wednesdays. If you want to follow along with What to Watch Wednesdays or What to Watch Weekends, follow What to Watch Wednesdays on Instagram at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces, and the same at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces, on YouTube to follow up with old episodes of the show being released in an archival format. Again, thank you all for listening in. I'll be back next Wednesday where I'll be telling you all what to watch. Good night, everybody.